The exact moment my mother's VIP Alaska Cruise boarding pass flashed neon red at the Seattle terminal, I was sitting 2,600 miles away, perched on her pristine quartz kitchen counter, eating a 50-cent pack of chicken ramen. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Oahu home, the harsh tropical sun beat down on the manicured lawn. The estate was dead quiet. No staging crews hauling velvet sofas through the foyer. No resort executives calling my father's cell phone. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the salty Pacific breeze slipping through the window louvers. I knew they were stranded. I knew their accounts were frozen solid, and thanks to Grandma Josephine, they never saw the axe falling. My name is Taylor Grant, and I am 17 years old. Before I tell you exactly how my parents lost everything at Gate 4, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Zara Told Stories, but only if this story truly speaks to you. How old are you right now? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know. Let me start from the beginning. To understand how the Grant family carefully curated empire crumbled in a matter of seconds, you have to rewind 14 days. Back to a Tuesday night dinner that sealed their fate. We sat around an imported Italian marble dining table. My mother, Olivia, spent her days orchestrating illusions. Running a high-end luxury real estate staging firm, she filled empty Hawaiian mansions with rented modern art and plush rugs to make them look lived in and loved. She treated our family much the same way. Every smile for the camera was calculated. Every family outing was a networking opportunity disguised as bonding. My father, David, managed an exclusive Waikiki resort. He spent his life catering to the whims of visiting billionaires, slowly absorbing their arrogance until it became his own signature trait. He wore tailored linen suits and checked his Rolex every 5 minutes, even when he had nowhere to be. Then there was Alyssa. 19, perpetually tanned, and home from a private mainland college her parents bragged about to anyone who would listen. She was the golden child, the sparkling centerpiece of Olivia's staged life. I was 17. I was the audience. I learned early on that blending into the wallpaper was the safest way to survive in a house that only valued perfection. That Tuesday evening, the central air conditioning hummed, pushing freezing air through the vast dining room, a stark contrast to the humid tropical evening outside. I had set the table perfectly, aligning the silver forks just the way Olivia demanded. The smell of roasted asparagus and seared salmon filled the air. A dinner prepared by the private chef my parents hired twice a week to maintain their image of success. Olivia took a sip of her white wine, her eyes scanning the table. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a glossy brochure. She dropped it onto the marble table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to my water glass. The cover featured a towering blue glacier and a pristine ocean liner cutting through icy waters. 14 days, Olivia declared, her manicured nails tapping the heavy paper. The presidential suite tier. We depart from Seattle next Friday. Alyssa dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her porcelain plate. A high-pitched squeal escaped her throat as she snatched the pamphlet from the table. Wait, formal nights. I need a new dress. No, 3 new dresses. We have to hit Kalakaua Avenue tomorrow. I cannot be seen wearing the same thing twice on a ship like this. I sat still, scanning the dates printed on the glossy paper. My summer school prep courses started the week they returned. It was a tight schedule, but I could make it work. I started mentally organizing a suitcase, wondering if my winter jacket from middle school still fit me. I even felt a tiny spark of excitement in my chest. Maybe this trip meant we could actually act like a real family for once, far away from the resort and the real estate clients. Then my father reached into his tailored slacks. He pulled out a spare house key. He did not hand it to me. He just flicked his index finger, sliding the cold brass across the smooth stone until it stopped inches from my plate.
"Someone has to stay behind to watch the property," David said.
He picked up his wine glass, his gaze fixed on the blank wall behind me, avoiding my eyes entirely. "The security system is acting up, and the dog needs feeding. Consider it a lesson in household responsibility."
The dining room went still. The spark in my chest snuffed out, replaced by a cold, familiar, hollow feeling that radiated all the way to my fingertips.
Alyssa did not even look up from the brochure. She was already typing a text on her phone, planning her shopping spree. Olivia busied herself wiping an invisible smudge off her wine glass, humming a quiet tune under her breath. They had booked a family vacation and intentionally cut me out. Not a weekend road trip, a 2-week luxury Alaskan cruise. I stared at the key. The sharp ridges cast a long shadow on the polished marble under the bright chandelier light. A normal teenager might have flipped a chair. They might have demanded an explanation, or burst into tears, or asked why they were not enough to be included. But I had been raised in the margins of this house. I knew the script by heart. If I argued, Olivia would tilt her head, sigh, and call me ungrateful and dramatic. David would rub his temples and complain about his blood pressure acting up. Alyssa would roll her eyes and play the victim, whining that I was ruining her special moment.
So I picked up the key. The metal was freezing against my palm.
I slipped it into my pocket, looked down at my plate, and took another bite of cold asparagus. I chewed slowly, tasting nothing. I said nothing at all. It was a silence they mistook for surrender. They thought they had won. They thought they could leave me behind without a second thought. They had no idea that my silence was not compliance. It was just the calm before the storm.
The morning after the dinner announcement, the house descended into controlled chaos.
Alyssa was tearing through the upstairs hallway, leaving a trail of discarded clothing and open shoeboxes in her wake. I was in the kitchen, carefully wiping down the quartz countertops, a chore Olivia insisted had to be done precisely twice a day to prevent any microscopic water spots. "Where is it?" Alyssa shrieked from the top of the stairs. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings, sharp and accusatory. I ignored her, focusing on the rhythmic motion of the microfiber cloth against the stone. "Taylor, get up here right now!" she yelled. I set the cloth down, my jaw tightening. I climbed the stairs, slowly tracing my hand along the polished mahogany banister. When I reached the landing, Alyssa was standing in the middle of her bedroom, hands on her hips, her face flushed with anger. Her room looked like a luxury boutique had exploded. Silk blouses were draped over lampshades, and dozens of designer shoes were scattered across the plush, white carpet. "Where is my gold pendant?" she demanded, pointing a French manicured finger at me. "The $400 one David bought me for my birthday. I left it on my vanity last night, and now it is gone." I looked at the vanity, which was buried under a mountain of expensive makeup palettes, half-empty perfume bottles, and discarded shopping bags. "I have not been in your room, Alyssa."
"Do not lie to me," she snapped, taking a step toward me. "You are just jealous. You are jealous because we are going on a luxury cruise and you have to stay here like the help. You took it to spite me."
The unfairness of the accusation burned in my chest, but I kept my face perfectly neutral. The help. That was how she saw me. "I did not take your necklace," I repeated evenly. "Maybe if you cleaned your room, you would find it." Olivia appeared in the hallway, adjusting an expensive silk scarf around her neck. "What is going on here?" she asked, her tone already laced with irritation. "Taylor stole my necklace," Alyssa whined, her voice instantly dropping an octave to sound more vulnerable. "The gold one. I need it for formal night, Mom." Olivia sighed dramatically, turning her sharp gaze on me. "Taylor, I do not have time for this nonsense today. Give your sister back her jewelry. I did not take it, I said, my voice steady though my heart was pounding against my ribs. Do not argue with me, Olivia snapped. The staging crew is waiting for me at the Diamond Head property, and I am already late. Since you have so much free time to cause trouble, you can spend the afternoon cleaning my home office. I want every surface dusted, the files alphabetized, and the shredder emptied. Maybe some hard work will teach you to respect other people's belongings. She turned on her heel and walked downstairs, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Alyssa shot me a triumphant smirk before slamming her bedroom door in my face. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, the silence ringing in my ears. The accusation was a convenient distraction, a way to paint me as the villain and justify leaving me behind. I walked slowly to Olivia's office at the end of the hall. The office was a shrine to her success. Framed magazine articles about her staging business covered the walls. The massive mahogany desk was perfectly organized, with precise stacks of staging contracts and fabric swatches. I started with the dusting, working my way around the room, making sure not to disturb the careful arrangement of her illusion. When I moved to empty the shredder basket, I noticed a piece of paper wedged between the bin and the heavy wooden desk. It was folded haphazardly, almost as if it had been dropped in a hurry. I reached down and pulled it out. It was a bank statement. Not from Olivia's business account or the joint checking account they used to pay the mortgage. The heading caught my eye immediately. Taylor Grant Educational Trust. My breath caught in my throat. I unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing the creases against the edge of the desk. The account type was listed clearly. Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, or UTMA. I recognized that acronym. When I was 10 years old, Grandma Josephine had taken me to the bank. She was a woman who commanded respect, sharp and observant, dressed in immaculate tweed suits even in the California heat. She had opened this exact account, depositing a significant sum of money meant solely for my college education. I remembered sitting in the stiff leather chair in the bank manager's office, my feet dangling inches above the floor. Josephine had leaned over, her dark eyes locking onto mine, and delivered a warning that I had never forgotten. Never let anyone manage your money, Taylor, she had said, her voice low and serious. Not even family. Control your own finances or someone else will control your life. She had made my father, David, the custodian of the account a legal requirement since I was a minor. But the money was mine. Legally, irrevocably mine. He was only authorized to manage it for my benefit. My eyes scanned down the rows of numbers on the statement. The beginning balance was substantial enough to cover tuition at any university I chose. But the ending balance was a single digit. 0. I traced my finger over the transaction history. The dates aligned perfectly with the past 6 months, a series of massive withdrawals transferring thousands of dollars out of my future and into the void. And then I saw the final transaction, a single, catastrophic line item that made the blood rush from my head. $24,500, paid directly to the exact luxury cruise line they were sailing on next Friday. My hands began to tremble. The paper rustled softly in the quiet office. I read the line again and then a third time, hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they remained stubbornly, cruelly the same. David had not just borrowed the money. He had not made a bad investment. He had committed a felony. He breached his fiduciary duty as the custodian of my UTMA account, draining my entire college fund to pay for an Alaskan vacation. A vacation I was explicitly excluded from. They did not just leave me behind to watch the house. They used my stolen future to fund their escape. The sheer audacity of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. The air in the office suddenly felt thick, heavy with the weight of their deception. I thought about the $400 necklace Alyssa was crying about. I thought about Olivia's new designer coats. I thought about David sliding the cold brass key across the marble table, telling me to feed the dog.
A hot, blinding surge of anger rose in my chest. I wanted to march out of the office, confront them, and scream until my lungs burned. I wanted to throw the statement in their faces and watch their carefully constructed masks shatter. But I stopped. I stood perfectly still, listening to the hum of the central air conditioning. Confronting them now would accomplish nothing. Olivia would spin a web of lies claiming the money was used for household expenses that benefited me. David would gaslight me, insisting he was just managing the funds dynamically and planned to replenish them eventually. Alyssa would complain that I was ruining the mood right before their trip. They would close ranks, protect their image, and I would still be the villain in their narrative. And more importantly, if they knew I had found the statement, they would hide the rest of the evidence. They would cover their tracks, burying the truth so deep I would never be able to prove it. I took a deep, shaky breath. I folded the bank statement carefully, following the original creases until it was a small, neat square. I slipped it into the back pocket of my jeans, pressing it flat against my skin. I chose silence. Not the submissive silence they expected, but a calculated, dangerous silence. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a screaming match. I was going to gather every piece of evidence in this house, every receipt, every hidden statement. I was going to build a fortress of undeniable proof. I picked up the microfiber cloth and went back to dusting Olivia's desk, making sure every surface was spotless. I was going to let them pack their bags. I was going to let them board that ship. And then I was going to burn their illusion to the ground. The 72 hours before their flight felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Every room in the house transformed into a staging area for their grand departure, a performance designed for an audience of 3. Alyssa claimed the expansive, formal living room, turning it into her personal runway. She had dragged 4 massive hard-shell suitcases onto the pristine white rug, leaving the zippers open like hungry mouths waiting to be fed. I walked past on my way to the kitchen, clutching a laundry basket full of David's golf shirts. Alyssa was twirling in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, holding a sequined midnight blue gown against her chest. "Does this scream captain's dinner to you, or is it too understated?" she asked, not actually looking at me. Her tone implied that my opinion was entirely irrelevant, but she needed a warm body to witness her existence. I paused, gripping the plastic rim of the laundry basket. The price tag was still dangling from the sleeve of the gown. $450. I knew exactly which withdrawal from the UTMA account had paid for that dress. It was the transaction dated 2 weeks ago, marked as a miscellaneous educational expense. My chest tightened, a familiar pressure building behind my ribs. "It looks fine," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Fine," Alyssa scoffed, tossing the gown onto a nearby armchair. "You clearly have no eye for fashion. This is designer. Mom said I have to look perfect for the formal nights. There is a whole networking event for junior executives on board, and David wants me to make a good impression." I tightened my grip on the basket and kept walking toward the laundry room. A good impression. That was the currency they traded in. They were spending my college tuition to buy Alyssa proximity to wealth. In the kitchen, Olivia was furiously tapping on her tablet, finalizing the itinerary. She wore a crisp linen blouse and oversized sunglasses perched on top of her perfectly blown-out hair, even though she had not left the house all morning. She looked up as I entered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Taylor, when you are done with the laundry, I need you to iron Alyssa's silk pieces," she instructed, not looking away from her screen. "Use the steamer, not the iron. The fabric is delicate and I am not replacing them if you burn a hole through the silk."
I set the basket down on the granite counter. Of course, I replied smoothly. And another thing, Olivia added, finally looking up. Do not touch the thermostat while we are gone. I have set it to 80 degrees. Do you have any idea how expensive electricity is right now? The utility bill last month was astronomical. We cannot afford to cool an empty house just so you can lounge around comfortably. Open a window if you get hot. I nodded, my mind working furiously behind my passive expression. We cannot afford to cool an empty house. That was a strange admission from a woman who had just dropped $24,000 on a vacation. It was a crack in the facade, a subtle indicator that their financial reality was stretched much thinner than they let on. They were living on the edge of a cliff, funding their illusions with stolen money. I spent the next 2 hours in the stifling heat of the laundry room, the steamer hissing as I smoothed the wrinkles out of Alyssa's expensive silk garments. The humidity in the small room was oppressive, sticking my t-shirt to my back. Every pass of the steam wand felt like a test of my endurance. Every garment I touched was a tangible piece of evidence, a physical manifestation of their betrayal. While the steam plumed around me, I thought about the house itself. Olivia made her living by staging properties, creating illusions of warmth and wealth to entice buyers. Our home was her masterpiece. Everything was curated, from the abstract art on the walls to the expensive throws draped casually over the sofas. But it was entirely empty. There were no family photos, no comfortable chairs that were actually meant for sitting. It was a showroom designed for outsiders to admire, devoid of any genuine comfort or stability. And right now, it was suffocating. I finished the last silk dress and hung it carefully on the rack. I needed a moment to breathe, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of their packing frenzy. I slipped into David's home office, quietly pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me. This was my real work. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the hidden Photo Vault application I had downloaded 3 days ago. I moved methodically, searching through the trash cans and the disorganized piles of mail on David's desk. I found a receipt for the 3 new suitcases Alyssa had demanded, totaling over $1,200. I snapped a photo. I found the confirmation email for their VIP drink packages, printed and left carelessly on top of the printer. I snapped a photo. I found the invoice for the pre-cruise hotel stay in Seattle, a luxury suite overlooking the water. I snapped a photo. I cross-referenced every receipt, every invoice, with the dates and amounts on the bank statement tucked safely in my pocket. The math was indisputable. They had drained the UTMA account with surgical precision, leaving nothing behind. I was building my arsenal piece by piece. I was not going to rely on my word against theirs. When the time came, I was going to bury them in a mountain of their own paper trails. The door handle rattled suddenly. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I quickly locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, grabbing a dust cloth from the credenza just as the door swung open. David stood in the doorway, looking annoyed. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. "Dusting," I said, holding up the cloth. "Olivia asked me to make sure everything was clean before you left." He waved his hand dismissively. "Leave it. I need to pack my laptop. Make sure those golf shirts are folded properly. I do not want creases in the collars." He walked past me, grabbing his expensive leather briefcase. I kept my head down, exiting the office quietly. My pulse was racing, but a cold sense of satisfaction settled in my stomach. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The morning of their departure arrived with the kind of frantic energy that usually preceded a major staged event. The black SUV idled in the driveway, its engine humming a low, impatient rhythm. David stood by the open trunk, consulting his Rolex while the driver loaded the heavy, hard-shell suitcases Alyssa had insisted were absolutely necessary for a 14-day voyage. Olivia paused by the front door, slipping on her oversized sunglasses, even though we were standing in the shaded entryway. She ran a critical eye over my appearance, taking in my faded denim shorts and plain white t-shirt. "Taylor, listen closely," she said, her tone sharp and precise, the same voice she used to direct moving crews. "I want the downstairs vacuums every other day. Do not let the dog on the white furniture under any circumstances. Check the mail, sort it by importance, and leave it on my desk. And remember what I said about the thermostat. Do not touch it." I nodded, keeping my hands clasped tightly behind my back so she would not see them shaking. "I understand." David finally turned away from the driver, slapping his hands together as if concluding a successful business transaction. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp bill, pressing it flat against the cool surface of the entryway console table. $50, he announced, tapping the paper with his index finger. "For emergencies only. If you need groceries, use what is already in the pantry. We stocked up on dry goods last week. Do not order takeout. Do not invite anyone over. Just lay low and keep the property secure." Alyssa brushed past me, smelling strongly of expensive perfume and entitlement. She dragged her carry-on bag over the threshold, her phone already glued to her hand. "Try not to ruin the house while we are gone," she tossed over her shoulder, not bothering to wait for a response, before climbing into the air-conditioned luxury of the SUV. "Have a good trip," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Olivia gave me a quick, performative hug that felt more like a physical inspection than an embrace. "We will call when we get to Seattle," she promised, though we both knew she would be too busy documenting the VIP check-in process to remember. The heavy oak door clicked shut, severing my final connection to them. I stood in the entryway and listened to the crunch of gravel as the SUV backed out of the driveway, followed by the fading hum of the engine. Then, silence. The kind of silence that usually settles over a house when a family goes to sleep, except it was barely 9 in the morning, and the silence was total. No footsteps on the hardwood floors, no television murmuring in the background, no distant arguments over missing jewelry, just the oppressive heavy stillness of a massive property suddenly devoid of life. I walked slowly into the kitchen, the vast expanse of white marble and stainless steel gleaming under the recessed lighting. My eyes locked onto the $50 bill sitting on the console table. I walked over and picked it up. It felt impossibly light, a meager offering designed to assuage whatever microscopic guilt David might have felt about leaving his teenage daughter alone to watch a multi-million-dollar estate while he sailed through glaciers. I folded the bill exactly in half, then in quarters, pressing the creases sharply until it was a tiny, tight square. I walked back to the kitchen and dropped it into an empty ceramic bowl on the counter. It landed with a soft ping. I was not going to touch it. It was a symbol of their inadequate performative care, and I refused to let them buy my compliance for $50. The heat inside the house was already beginning to rise. Olivia had been serious about the thermostat setting it firmly at 80 degrees before locking the panel with a passcode. In Hawaii, an uncooled house quickly turns into a greenhouse. The air grew thick and stagnant, the tropical humidity seeping through the walls and pressing down on my chest. I decided to start with a glass of cold water to combat the stifling heat. I walked over to the deep farmhouse sink and pushed the sleek chrome handle upward. Nothing happened. I frowned, pushing it further. A low, hollow sputtering sound echoed from the pipes, followed by a few sad drips of brown liquid, and then total silence. The water pressure was completely gone. I tried the filtered water dispenser on the front of the refrigerator. Nothing. I ran upstairs to the master bathroom and twisted the shower knob. The same hollow rattle. Panic flared briefly in my chest, hot and sharp. I hurried down to David's home office, my mind racing. Water shutoffs were rare in our exclusive neighborhood, usually communicated weeks in advance by the homeowners association. I started digging through the unread mail piled haphazardly on his desk, searching for a notice. I found it buried under a stack of glossy real estate magazines. It was a bright pink envelope from the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. I tore it open. Final notice of disconnectionity. My eyes scanned the bold text. The account was 2 months past due. A total outstanding balance of $480. The shutoff date listed was today. I sank into David's heavy leather chair, the paper trembling in my hands. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. David had missed the utility payment to fund the cruise excursions. He had prioritized a helicopter tour over a glacier, overpaying the water bill for the house where he left his youngest child. The realization hit me harder than the bank statement had. The bank statement was a theft of my future. This was a theft of my immediate survival. He had known the water would be shut off. He had known, and he had left me anyway with $50 and a pantry full of dry pasta. I sat in the sweltering office, sweat beading on my forehead, calculating the true magnitude of what they had done. They had not just stolen my college fund. They had jeopardized my physical well-being to maintain their illusion of wealth. I walked back to the kitchen and opened the pantry. David was right. They had stocked up on dry goods. Rows of expensive artisanal pasta bags of quinoa and imported canned tomatoes lined the shelves. But without water to boil the pasta or rinse the quinoa, the food was largely useless. I found a case of bottled sparkling water hidden behind the dog food bin in the laundry room. It was not ideal, but it was hydration. I dragged it into the kitchen, the cardboard tearing under the weight. For the next 4 days, I survived on a diet of dry cereal granola bars and the occasional can of soup eaten cold straight from the tin. The house became a suffocating oven. I kept all the windows closed, terrified of the security system Olivia had mentioned acting up, choosing security over ventilation. The isolation began to weigh on me, a heavy, invisible blanket that pressed down harder with each passing hour. I watched my mother's Instagram stories from the small screen of my phone. I saw her posing in the Seattle airport lounge, a glass of champagne in hand, the caption reading, "Off to Alaska. So blessed for this family time." I saw Alyssa showing off her new silk dresses in their luxury hotel suite, the Seattle skyline glittering behind her. I saw David smiling broadly, checking his Rolex, completely unfazed by the fact that he had left me in a sweltering house with no running water. I did not comment. I did not text them to complain about the utilities. I simply watched, documenting their joy, letting their blatant disregard fuel the cold, hard resolve solidifying in my core. I was surviving their neglect, and every cold can of soup, every sip of warm, sparkling water was a down payment on the revenge I was meticulously planning. The oppressive Hawaiian heat had transformed our Oahu estate into a beautifully decorated kiln. By the afternoon of the 4th day, the stagnant air inside felt thick enough to chew. My clothes clung to my skin, damp with constant perspiration. I had spent the entire morning lying on the cool marble floor of the downstairs guest bathroom, the only spot in the residence that offered any relief from the relentless tropical sun pouring through the unshaded windows. I was rationing my final few bottles of sparkling water, using a tiny splash to soften a brick of instant chicken noodles in a porcelain bowl. The carbonation made the salty broth fizz strangely, but gnawing hunger had long ago overpowered my culinary standards. The silence enveloping the property remained unbroken, a heavy, suffocating blanket that muffled even my own anxious thoughts. My lips were cracked. A dull headache throbbed steadily behind my eyes, and my energy was depleting rapidly.
A sharp, rhythmic rapping against the heavy oak front door shattered the stillness. I froze. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, sending a fresh wave of sweat down my spine. David had been explicit about keeping a low profile. Was it the homeowners association demanding a lawn treatment? A neighbor noticing the lack of activity? I set the noodle bowl down on the kitchen island, wiping my damp palms on my denim shorts. I crept through the grand foyer, keeping my footsteps light against the polished hardwood. I leaned forward, pressing my eye to the brass peephole, holding my breath. Standing on the shaded porch was a woman who did not belong in the casual, laid-back environment of a Tuesday afternoon in Honolulu. She wore a tailored linen suit in a crisp shade of navy, her silver hair styled in an immaculate bob that defied the relentless island humidity. A structured designer handbag rested in the crook of her arm. It was Grandma Josephine. She was my father's mother, a formidable widow who lived in a sleek beachfront condominium in San Diego. Josephine was a woman constructed entirely of sharp angles and sharper instincts. Having built and sold her own lucrative logistics company in the 1980s, she suffered no fools and despised pretense of any kind. She raised David alone, instilling values of hard work and financial independence that he had somehow managed to entirely forget. She was the only person in the world who made Olivia genuinely nervous. Her unannounced arrival was a tectonic shift in my carefully managed reality. She had likely flown in early to coordinate the upcoming mainland family reunion, preferring face-to-face logistics over digital communication. I unlocked the deadbolt, my hands trembling as the metal mechanism clicked. The heavy door swung inward. Josephine stood there, her piercing dark eyes sweeping over me in a fraction of a second. She took in my disheveled appearance, my flushed face, and the wrinkled clothes I had been wearing for 48 hours. "Taylor," she said, her voice crisp and carrying an undeniable edge of authority. "You look like you have been stranded on a desert island. Where are your parents?" My psychological conditioning kicked in instantly. The protective script Olivia had drilled into my head since childhood took over, bypassing my rational thought. "They are not here," I stammered, blocking the threshold slightly with my body. "They had to leave for a last-minute business trip, a real estate staging conference in Seattle. They will be back soon." Josephine did not blink. She simply tilted her head, her gaze boring into mine with laser precision. "Is that so?" she murmured. "And they left you here alone? Why did they not hire a sitter, or send you to a friend's house?" "I am 17, I replied, forcing my voice to sound steady. "I can take care of myself. It is fine, Grandma, really. Everything is under control." Josephine stepped forward. I instinctively retreated, allowing her to cross the threshold. The moment she entered the foyer, the wall of stagnant 80-degree air hit her. She paused, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in a tight frown. "Good heavens," she muttered, waving a hand in front of her face. "Is the air conditioning broken? It feels like an industrial sauna in here." "Olivia turned it off," I said quickly, reciting the memory, "to save energy while they were gone." Josephine walked past me, her low-heeled shoes clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. She moved with purpose, surveying the environment like a detective evaluating a crime scene. She entered the sprawling kitchen, her eyes darting across the pristine countertops, the empty fruit bowl, and finally landing on the porcelain bowl filled with fizzing, lukewarm ramen noodles. She stared at my sad excuse for a meal, her expression unreadable, but a muscle in her jaw twitched. "Where is Alyssa?" she asked, turning her head just enough to catch my reaction. "She went with them," I lied, my throat feeling tighter by the second. "She wanted to tour a graduate school up there while Olivia attended her seminars." Josephine slowly turned to face me.
The air between us crackled with unspoken tension. My grandmother possessed a built-in lie detector that had terrified my father for decades. She knew I was hiding something. Olivia never travels without her staging portfolio. Yet I see it sitting right there on the credenza, Josephine pointed out smoothly. And the dog is nowhere to be seen, which means he was boarded. A rather expensive endeavor for a sudden last-minute business trip. She continued her slow pacing, wandering toward David's home office. The door was slightly ajar. I had left it open yesterday, attempting to catch a non-existent cross breeze. Before I could step in her path, she pushed the oak panel wider and walked inside. Her eyes scanned the disorganized desk. David was notoriously messy when Olivia was not staging his workspace for guests. And there, sitting right on top of his leather blotter, was the bright pink envelope from the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. Josephine picked it up. She did not ask for permission. She pulled the folded paper from the envelope and read the final notice of disconnection. I watched from the doorway, my stomach tying itself into a painful knot. I saw her eyes jump from the past due amount of $480 to the date of shutoff, which had passed 2 days ago. She lowered the paper, her gaze shifting to the ensuite bathroom attached to the office. She walked over, turned the chrome faucet on the sink, and waited. A hollow, rattling sound echoed through the dry pipes. No water came out. When she turned back to me, the polished, polite demeanor of a visiting relative had vanished entirely. In its place was a chilling, calculating matriarch. The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the suffocating heat. Her dark eyes were hard, shimmering with a dangerous, quiet anger that sent a shiver down my spine. "Let us review the facts, Taylor," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "Your parents are supposedly on a business trip. They took your sister to look at graduate schools, leaving you behind in a house with no air conditioning. And according to this official notice, they also failed to pay the utility bill, leaving you without running water. Are you truly expecting me to believe this fabricated narrative?" I swallowed hard, my throat parched and aching. I did not know what to say. The fortress of lies I had been trained to uphold was crumbling to dust under her intense scrutiny. I looked down at the hardwood floor, unable to meet her piercing gaze. My silence was all the confirmation she needed. Josephine folded the pink notice and slipped it deliberately into her structured handbag. She walked back into the kitchen, pulled out one of the heavy bar stools, and sat down at the granite island. She placed her hands flat on the counter, her posture rigid, unyielding, and resolute. "I am not leaving this house," she stated, her tone brokering no argument whatsoever. "You are going to sit down across from me right now. You are going to tell me exactly where my son is, why you are eating raw noodles, and what kind of twisted game is being played in this family. And if you attempt to lie to me again, I promise you the fallout will be far worse than a disconnected water line." The granite surface of the kitchen island felt like a slab of ice beneath my forearms. Josephine sat directly across from me, her posture rigid, her navy linen suit practically radiating authority. The stifling heat of the uncooled house seemed to bounce off her without leaving a mark. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The quiet, deadly calm in her tone was more terrifying than any screaming match Olivia had ever orchestrated. "I want the truth, Taylor," she stated, each word clipped and precise. "No more rehearsals. No more covering for your parents. Where are they? And why are you stranded in a house with no running water?" I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of judgment or disbelief, but I only saw a fierce protective demand for honesty. The carefully constructed fortress of lies I had been taught to maintain since childhood suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The conditioning that dictated I must always protect the family image, no matter the personal cost, began to crack. The dam broke. I pushed my bar stool back, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I did not say a word. I turned and ran up the sweeping staircase, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. I went straight to my bedroom, dropped to my knees, and pulled a loose floorboard near my closet. I reached into the dark cavity and retrieved the small, folded square of paper I had guarded for a week. When I returned to the kitchen, Josephine was exactly where I had left her. I walked up to the island and slid the heavily creased paper across the polished granite. She picked it up slowly, her brow furrowing slightly as she unfolded it. She reached into her structured designer handbag, retrieved a pair of tortoiseshell reading glasses, and slipped them onto her face. I watched her meticulously memorizing every microscopic shift in her demeanor. The physical reaction of the matriarch was a masterclass in controlled devastation. Her hands, which had been delicately smoothing the edges of the paper, suddenly stopped moving. Her spine, already straight, seemed to stiffen further, pulling her shoulders back until she resembled a marble statue. The air in the kitchen grew impossibly still. I knew exactly what she was looking at. The heading, Taylor Grant Educational Trust. The account type, Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. The custodian, David Grant. And the final catastrophic line item, a withdrawal of $24,500 paid directly to a premier ocean liner company. Josephine read the document twice. When she finally looked up, her dark eyes were stripped of any grandmotherly warmth. They were the eyes of a woman who had built an empire in a cutthroat industry, a woman who understood the exact legal definition of fiduciary duty and the precise penalties for breaching it. David did not just borrow this, she whispered, her voice dangerously soft. He committed felony fraud against a protected minor trust. He drained your college fund to pay for a vacation. I nodded, my throat tight. And they left me behind to watch the house. Josephine placed the bank statement flat on the granite, her manicured fingers resting gently on top of the stolen numbers. The silence stretched between us thick with unspoken implications. Olivia and David had always feared Josephine because she represented the one thing their staged Hawaiian life lacked: genuine, unassailable financial power. She had worked 80-hour weeks managing shipping logistics to ensure David would never know the sting of poverty, and he had repaid that sacrifice by stealing from his own child to maintain a facade of wealth. Where are they right now? Josephine asked, removing her glasses and placing them carefully on the counter. I want the exact location. I glanced at the digital clock on the microwave. The glowing red numbers read 11:14 in the morning, Hawaiian time. They flew to Seattle yesterday, I answered, my voice finally finding its footing. They spent the night in a luxury suite downtown. The itinerary Olivia printed said they are supposed to arrive at the cruise terminal by 2 o'clock Pacific time for the VIP check-in process. Josephine calculated the time difference instantly. That means they are boarding in exactly 4 hours. Yes, I confirmed. Alyssa has been posting videos from their hotel balcony all morning. Josephine stood up from the bar stool. She did not pace. She did not yell. She simply picked up her handbag and retrieved her smartphone. The quiet, simmering anger radiating from her was palpable. She was a woman calculating a strike, evaluating her leverage, and preparing to dismantle the illusion her son had so carelessly built. I had spent my entire life watching my parents manipulate reality to suit their narrative. Olivia staged homes to look perfect, hiding cracked foundations behind expensive art. David managed a luxury resort, smiling at wealthy patrons while ignoring the crumbling infrastructure behind the scenes. They had treated me the same way, pushing me into the background so their golden child could shine. But Josephine operated in a completely different reality. She dealt in facts, in ledgers, and in undeniable truths. She looked down at the bank statement one last time, her expression hardening into absolute resolve. She tapped a sequence of numbers into her phone, bringing up a secure banking application. "They believe they have gotten away with this," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They believe they can simply sail away on stolen money while you swelter in a house they failed to maintain." She looked up, locking her intense gaze with mine. David forgot a very crucial detail about how he funds his pathetic little empire, Taylor. He forgot who built the foundation he is currently standing on. And he is about to learn exactly what happens when you attempt to bite the hand that feeds you. The tension in the kitchen spiked a sharp electric anticipation, replacing the heavy despair that had weighed me down for days. Josephine was not just intervening. She was preparing to orchestrate a demolition. And I was finally going to watch their carefully staged world burn. The suffocating air of the Hawaiian kitchen felt entirely separate from the cold, calculated energy radiating from the woman sitting across from me. Josephine did not raise her voice or pound her fist against the granite island. Instead, she reached into her structured navy handbag with the measured grace of a surgeon selecting a scalpel. She bypassed her phone and pulled out a sleek silver tablet encased in dark leather. She set it gently onto the counter right next to the bank statement that proved my father had stolen my future. I stood paralyzed, my bare feet rooted to the hardwood floor. I was waiting for the explosion. I was waiting for her to call David to demand answers, to scream through the receiver the way Olivia did when a staging client canceled at the last minute. But Josephine remained silent. Her manicured fingers glided across the glass screen, entering a complex alphanumeric passcode. To understand the trap my grandmother was about to spring, you have to understand the illusion of my father's wealth. David managed an exclusive Waikiki resort surrounded by billionaires, dignitaries, and celebrities. Over the years, proximity to that level of opulence had warped his sense of reality. He began to believe he belonged in their tax bracket rather than on their payroll. But living a billionaire lifestyle on a hospitality manager's salary required an endless stream of credit. A decade ago, when David received his first major executive promotion, he convinced Josephine to co-sign a premium corporate credit account. He argued he needed a high-limit card to cover emergency resort vendor expenses and entertain VIP clients before the accounting department could process reimbursements. Josephine, wanting to support his career advancement, agreed to be the primary guarantor. It was a black card, holding a limit higher than most people's annual salaries. David treated that card like a secret weapon, flashing it at expensive dinners to maintain his facade. But because Josephine was the primary account holder, she maintained ultimate administrative control. She received the quarterly summaries, and she retained the master login credentials. The tablet screen illuminated her face with a pale blue glow. She opened a secure financial application, bypassing the standard consumer banking portals and entering the commercial division. The loading icon spun for a fraction of a second before revealing a dashboard of accounts. I watched the reflection of the screen dance across the lenses of her tortoiseshell reading glasses. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning ledgers and recent transaction histories. The muscle in her jaw fluttered once, the only physical betrayal of the fury boiling beneath her immaculate exterior. "There it is," she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the granite counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. What did he do? Josephine turned the tablet around, sliding it across the smooth stone so it sat directly in front of me. She tapped a specific line item near the top of the screen. "Look at the pending transactions, Taylor. Tell me what you see." I squinted at the glowing text. Beneath a long list of mundane purchases was a charge that stood out like a beacon. It was dated yesterday. The vendor name listed was the exact luxury ocean liner company my family was currently attempting to board in Seattle. The amount, was $5,000. The status read as pending hold.
I do not understand, I murmured, shaking my head. The trust fund statement said he already paid for the tickets and the suite. Why is there another charge for $5,000? Because luxury cruise lines require a major credit card on file before they ever let you step foot on the gangway. Josephine explained, her tone sharp and instructive. It is an incidentals hold. It covers potential onboard expenses, gratuities, premium dining, and offshore excursions. They place a block on the funds to ensure the guest can actually afford the lifestyle they are about to consume. The pieces clicked together in my mind, forming a picture of breathtaking arrogance. David had drained my educational trust to purchase the physical tickets, but his personal credit cards were maxed out, which explained why the water to our house had been shut off. He had zero liquidity left. To board that ship and maintain his illusion of wealth, he needed a high-limit card to secure the incidentals. He used the corporate account, I said, the realization settling heavily in my chest. He used your card. He categorized it as a corporate retreat expense, Josephine said, pointing to a small digital tag next to the transaction. He likely intended to pay it off slowly over the next year, burying the debt inside his usual vendor reimbursements, praying I would never look closely enough at the itemized monthly statements to notice the discrepancy. She retrieved the tablet, pulling it back across the counter. He stole your trust fund to buy his way to the port, but he used my name to buy his way onto the ship. I expected her to pick up her phone and call him. I braced myself for the confrontation, anticipating the loud, messy drama that always accompanied conflict in my family. But Josephine did not open her contacts. She opened the keypad. "Are you going to warn him?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Josephine paused, her finger hovering over the screen. She looked up at me, her dark eyes pinning me in place. She offered a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. Power is not loud, Taylor. Only fear is loud. Olivia yells because she is terrified people will see through her staging. David boasts because he is terrified of being ordinary. When you hold the cards, you do not need to announce your next move. You simply play the winning hand and let them deal with the fallout. She dialed a toll-free number. She pressed the speaker icon, setting the phone down onto the granite. A synthetic voice chimed, thanking her for calling the Premium Commercial Services Division before transferring the line to a live security agent. "Thank you for calling Executive Client Support. My name is Marcus. How may I assist you today?" Josephine sat perfectly straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Good afternoon, Marcus. My name is Josephine Grant. I am the primary guarantor on account number ending in 4829. I need to report a fraudulent transaction and initiate an immediate hard freeze on the entire line of credit." I stopped breathing. The air in the stifling kitchen seemed to vanish entirely. "Of course, Ms. Grant," Marcus replied, his professional tone shifting into high alert. "I can certainly assist you with that. For your security, I need to verify your identity. Can you provide the administrative PIN code established at the account origination?" Josephine recited a sequence of numbers without a moment's hesitation. "Thank you," Marcus said, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the small speaker. "I see the account. Which transaction are we disputing today?" "There is a pending hold in the amount of $5,000 processed yesterday by a commercial cruise line operating out of the port of Seattle," Josephine stated cleanly. "That charge is unauthorized. The secondary cardholder, David Grant, does not have permission to utilize this account for personal travel. Furthermore, I believe the physical card may be compromised." I stared at my grandmother in awe. She was not just stopping the charge. She was systematically dismantling his only remaining financial lifeline. "I see the pending hold right here," Marcus confirmed.
Because this charge is currently in a pending authorization state, I can void the approval code immediately. The funds will be released back to your available credit, and the merchant will receive a decline status if they attempt to finalize the capture. Do it, Josephine commanded.
And you requested a hard freeze on the account.
Marcus continued.
Just to be clear, this will immediately decline any future transactions across all issued cards associated with this account. Any recurring payments will also fail. That is exactly what I want,
Josephine said.
The sound of keystrokes filled the silence of the sweltering house. Every click felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of my parents' luxury vacation. David and Olivia were likely standing in a VIP terminal right now, surrounded by wealthy travelers carrying designer luggage and waiting for their boarding group to be called. They were mere hours away from escaping to a glacial paradise.
The hold has been voided, Ms. Grant, Marcus announced.
The authorization has been revoked, and the entire account is now locked under a fraud prevention freeze. No further transactions will be approved until you visit a branch in person with primary identification. Is there anything else I can help you secure today? That will be all, Marcus. You have been very efficient. Josephine ended the call. The screen went dark. She picked up the phone and slipped it back into her structured handbag, her expression remaining dangerously placid. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave. It was almost noon in Hawaii, which meant it was approaching 3 o'clock on the West Coast. The boarding process was actively underway. I stood in the silent, suffocating heat of the kitchen, watching my grandmother quietly fold her reading glasses. She had not yelled. She had not shed a single tear. With one brief phone call, she had severed the anchor keeping my parents afloat. The leverage was pulled, the trap was set, and the collapse was now inevitable. The silence in the Hawaiian kitchen was absolute, save for the faint electronic chime of a notification originating from the silver tablet. Josephine had not locked the screen after severing my father's financial lifeline. Instead, her manicured finger navigated away from the commercial banking portal and tapped a familiar, brightly colored application icon. She opened social media. For my mother, vacations were never about relaxation or family bonding. They were meticulously orchestrated marketing campaigns. Olivia leveraged her personal life to sell an aspirational lifestyle to her high net worth real estate clientele. If she could project an image of effortless opulence, she could convince prospective homebuyers that her staging services were the key to unlocking that exact same reality. Therefore, going on a 14-day glacial voyage without broadcasting every single luxurious detail was entirely out of the question. The screen illuminated with a live video feed. Josephine placed the device flat on the granite island right next to the damning trust fund ledger. I leaned in, my shoulder brushing against my grandmother's navy linen suit. The stifling, stagnant heat of our uncooled residence felt a million miles away from the crisp, high-definition image streaming into the room. Olivia filled the frame, holding her smartphone at a high, flattering angle. She looked flawless. Her hair was styled in soft, cascading waves, and she wore a tailored ivory blazer that contrasted perfectly with the overcast slate-gray skies visible through the massive glass windows behind her. The port of Seattle bustled in the background, a hive of wealthy travelers preparing to board a floating palace. "Hello, everyone," Olivia crooned into the camera, her voice dripping with that manufactured honey-sweet tone she reserved exclusively for paying clients and digital audiences. "We are finally here at the terminal, and I just had to share this moment with all of you. The VIP boarding lounge is absolutely stunning. They are serving complimentary mimosa cocktails, and the view of the vessel is simply breathtaking." She panned the camera around, showcasing the exclusive waiting area. Plush velvet seating, elegant floral arrangements, and attentive staff in crisp nautical uniforms carrying silver trays. The dramatic irony of the situation settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I was sitting in a sweltering house with no running water, eating raw noodles, while watching the woman who abandoned me brag about complimentary champagne. But for the first time in my 17 years of existence, the injustice did not crush me. It energized me. Because I knew something she did not. I knew she was standing on a trap door, and Josephine had just pulled the lever. The camera swung back to capture my father and sister. David stood near a mahogany check-in podium, looking immensely pleased with himself. He wore a custom-fit charcoal suit, shifting his weight arrogantly, occasionally checking his heavy silver wristwatch. Alyssa stood next to him, complaining loudly about the humidity ruining her blowout, dragging her brand-new $1,200 designer luggage. "Look at my gorgeous family," Olivia narrated, aiming the lens at them. "David has been working so hard managing the resort this season. He truly deserves a premium getaway. And Alyssa just finished a grueling semester at her university, so we are spoiling her. We are about to step up to the concierge desk right now to finalize our suite access." A stream of comments scrolled rapidly up the left side of the tablet screen. Real estate partners, wealthy neighbors, and aspirational followers typing an endless parade of heart emojis and envious praises. "So incredibly jealous. You guys look amazing. Absolute family goals." I glanced sideways at Josephine. The matriarch was watching the performance with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. She did not blink. She simply waited for the inevitable collision between my parents' fabricated reality and the concrete wall of her financial authority. On the screen, a polite boarding agent gestured for my father to approach the mahogany desk. The woman wore a name tag reading Zara, her smile bright and professionally trained to handle the most demanding travelers. Olivia followed David closely, keeping the camera focused on his profile to capture the prestigious moment of their embarkation. "Welcome to the presidential tier, Mr. Grant," the agent greeted, her voice captured clearly by the smartphone microphone. "I have your suite prepped and ready on the observation deck. I just need your passports and a major credit card to secure the $5,000 incidentals authorization, and we will have you escorted directly to your stateroom." "Of course," David replied smoothly, exuding the effortless confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his charcoal suit and retrieved a sleek black leather wallet. He pulled out the heavy metal corporate card, the exact piece of plastic carrying Josephine's name on the primary account line, and handed it to the agent with a magnanimous nod. Olivia adjusted her angle, making sure the shiny black card was visible to her thousands of followers. Securing our onboard amenities, she whispered to the audience, winking playfully. "We are definitely upgrading to the private cabana experience at our first port of call." Zara took the card, inserted it into the sleek digital terminal on her desk, and began typing on her keyboard. In the Hawaiian kitchen, my heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to solidify. I watched the live feed with a morbid, electrifying fascination. The processing icon spun on the agent's screen. A few seconds passed. Zara kept her professional smile pinned in place, but her fingers paused over the keys. She pulled the card out of the terminal, wiped the chip on her sleeve, and inserted it a second time. "Is there a problem?" David asked, his tone laced with a hint of aristocratic annoyance. He hated waiting. Waiting was for economy class passengers, not executives. "Just a slight network delay, sir," Zara replied smoothly, though her eyes darted nervously across her monitor. "These machines can be a bit temperamental today. Let me try entering it manually." She began keying the 16-digit sequence into the system. Olivia maintained her smile for the camera, but the edge of her mouth tightened. She subtly shifted her weight, sensing a microscopic fracture in her perfect broadcast. The comments continued to scroll, oblivious to the rising tension. Sarah hit the enter key. The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. Through the live feed, I heard the distinct, sharp, negative beep of a rejected transaction. The glowing light on the card reader, previously a welcoming green, flashed a bright, undeniable neon red. The boarding agent's professional smile vanished, replaced by an expression of deep, uncomfortable pity. She looked up at my father, her voice dropping to a discreet, hushed whisper that was still entirely audible to the thousands of people watching the stream. "I am so sorry, Mr. Grant," she murmured, pushing the heavy black card across the mahogany desk. "The system is declining the authorization. It appears there is a hard fraud freeze placed on this account. Do you happen to have another method of payment to secure the boarding passes?" David stared at the plastic as if it had suddenly burst into flames. His tan face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. "Excuse me," he stammered, his arrogant posture instantly dissolving into genuine panic. "That is impossible. Try it again." "I cannot, sir," Sarah replied, her tone firming up. "The terminal is locking the profile. Until the incidentals hold is cleared, the system will not allow me to print your boarding credentials." Alyssa stepped forward, her voice shrill and echoing through the quiet VIP lounge. "What do you mean you cannot print them? Our luggage is already tagged. We are in the presidential suite." Olivia finally realized the catastrophe unfolding in front of a live audience. Her eyes darted wildly toward the camera lens. The stream of comments had shifted from envious praise to confused inquiries. "Is everything okay? Did his card just decline? Oh my goodness, how embarrassing." "Wait!" Olivia gasped, her perfectly manicured hand shooting forward to cover the lens. "We are just experiencing a minor technical—" The screen jolted wildly as she fumbled with the device. The ceiling of the terminal blurred across the frame, followed by a glimpse of David desperately digging through his wallet for a backup card that we both knew was completely maxed out. Then the video feed froze, pixelated into a mosaic of gray and ivory, and abruptly cut to black. The live broadcast ended. The silence returned to the sweltering Hawaiian kitchen. The tablet screen went dark, reflecting our exhausted, sweat-dampened faces. I stared at the blank glass, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the public execution I had just witnessed. They were stranded, exposed in front of their peers, humiliated in front of strangers, and stripped of the very illusion they had sacrificed my future to maintain. Josephine reached forward, her manicured fingers gently pressing the power button on the edge of the tablet. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply folded her hands back into her lap and looked out the window at the brilliant blue Hawaiian sky. "They aren't going to Alaska," she said softly. The immediate aftermath of the frozen live stream was a chaotic void. While I sat in the sweltering silence of the Hawaiian kitchen 2,600 miles away, the illusion of my parents' invincibility was actively disintegrating in front of a live audience. The VIP terminal in Seattle, a space designed to pamper and isolate high-net-worth individuals from the masses, suddenly transformed into a gilded cage. My imagination filled the gaps left by the blackened screen. I pictured the boarding agent Sarah maintaining her professional composure while discreetly pressing a button beneath the mahogany desk. Port security protocols for unresolved high-dollar holds were strict. When a major card declined with a hard fraud freeze at embarkation, the system automatically flagged the reservation for potential identity theft or booking fraud. In my mind, I saw two uniformed port security officers stepping briskly into the plush velvet waiting area. They would have approached my father, their voices low but firm, requesting that the Grant family step out of the VIP boarding line and accompany them to a private administrative office to resolve a serious payment discrepancy. The public humiliation would have been devastating. Olivia, hyper-aware of optics, would have tried to laugh it off, offering tight, panicked smiles to the other wealthy passengers staring at them. Alyssa would have protested loudly, clutching her designer luggage, completely unable to process why she was being escorted away from her presidential suite access. David, stripped of his platinum card leverage, would have marched alongside the officers in stunned, furious silence.
10 minutes passed in our Oahu kitchen.
The heat continued to press down on the walls, but a strange chill had settled in my chest. Josephine remained perfectly still, her silver tablet resting untouched on the granite island. Then, my smartphone vibrated against the counter. The sudden buzz made me flinch. The screen illuminated, displaying an incoming call. The contact photo was a professionally staged family portrait taken 3 years ago, featuring Olivia David and Alyssa smiling radiantly on a private beach. I had been instructed to stand just outside the frame during that photo shoot, holding the lighting reflector. "It is him," I whispered, staring at the vibrating device. "He is calling me." Josephine turned her head slowly. She reached out her manicured fingers, wrapping around the edges of my phone. She did not ask for permission. She simply claimed the device, understanding that I was not equipped to handle the sheer volume of narcissistic rage about to erupt through the speaker. She slid her thumb across the glass, accepting the call, and immediately pressed the speaker icon. She set the phone down gently on the counter. "Taylor." David roared, his voice echoing violently through the quiet house. It was the tone he used when a subordinate at the resort had made a catastrophic error. It was loud, abusive, and dripping with aggressive entitlement.
"Where is my platinum card?" he demanded, not bothering to ask how I was surviving in an uncooled house with no water.
"The one I keep in the bottom left drawer of the mahogany desk in my office. I need you to go find it right now. Read me the numbers, the expiration date, and the security code. Do not mess this up. The stupid terminal here is glitching and freezing my corporate account. Olivia is having a panic attack in a security office, and Alyssa is crying. Move. Now." He paused, breathing heavily into the microphone, waiting for my conditioned response. He expected a frantic apology. He expected blind obedience. Instead, a profound, terrifying silence answered him. Josephine leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the granite island. "David," she said, her voice dropping into a register of glacial calm. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. I could almost hear the blood draining from my father's face. The aggressive, arrogant resort manager vanished instantly, replaced by a man who realized he had just stepped onto a landmine. Mother David stammered his voice, shrinking to a tight, high-pitched whisper. "What are you doing in Hawaii? Why are you answering Taylor's phone?" "I came to coordinate the upcoming mainland reunion," Josephine replied smoothly, omitting the truth about her sudden intervention. "And it is incredibly fortunate that I did, because if I had not arrived, I might never have discovered that you left my 17-year-old granddaughter abandoned in a sweltering house with no running water and $50 to her name." David scrambled to rebuild his facade. "Mother, there is a massive misunderstanding. The water issue is just a bank error. And Taylor is perfectly fine. She is old enough to stay home for a few days while we take a brief corporate retreat. We are in Seattle right now handling some resort business." "Stop talking," Josephine commanded, cutting through his lies with surgical precision. David went completely silent. "The terminal is not glitching, David," she continued, her tone sharpening into a weapon. "I called the commercial fraud division myself. I reported the pending authorization as unauthorized, and I personally initiated the hard freeze on the entire line of credit. You are not experiencing a technical error. You are experiencing the consequences of theft." "Mother, you cannot do this!" David pleaded, panic finally fracturing his composure. "You have to lift the freeze. They are denying our boarding passes. They have us in a security holding room. The ship leaves in 2 hours. Olivia has clients watching this trip. This will ruin us." "The ship is leaving without you," Josephine stated, her voice devoid of any sympathy. You are not going to Alaska. You are not upgrading to a private cabana. Your luxury vacation is permanently canceled. David gasped, a ragged, desperate sound. You cannot cancel this trip. I already paid for the suite. The tickets are non-refundable. Oh, I am fully aware of how the suite was funded, Josephine murmured, her eyes flicking toward the bank statement resting on the counter. And that brings me to the second part of this conversation. She picked up the UTMA document, the heavy paper rustling slightly near the microphone. I found a very interesting bank statement in Olivia's office, David. It details the activity of the Taylor Grant Educational Trust, the account I funded, the account you were legally bound to protect as the designated custodian. The line went dead quiet. Even the background noise of the Seattle terminal seemed to vanish. David knew he was caught. There was no spinning this. There was no staging this. It appears the balance is currently 0, Josephine said, delivering the fatal blow. $24,500 withdrawn and transferred directly to a luxury ocean liner company. Mother, please, David begged, his voice cracking. I can explain. I was going to pay it back. I just needed to borrow it temporarily to give the family a much-needed bonding experience. The stress of the resort has been overwhelming. I was managing the funds dynamically. You committed felony fiduciary fraud, Josephine corrected him sharply. You stole your daughter's college tuition to buy yourself a place in line at a VIP terminal. And then you abandoned that same daughter in a house with no utilities so you could sail away on her stolen future. David began to hyperventilate. The sound was pathetic, a rapid, shallow wheezing echoing through the speaker. You have exactly 24 hours. Josephine delivered her ultimatum, the finality in her voice absolute. 24 hours to find a way back to Honolulu. You will stand in front of me in this house by noon tomorrow, and if we cannot get a flight, David whispered, desperation dripping from every word. Mother, my cards are frozen. I have no access to cash. That is entirely your problem to solve, Josephine replied coldly. If you are not standing in this kitchen by 12 o'clock tomorrow, I will call the Honolulu Police Department. I will hand them the UTMA bank statements, and I will formally report the theft of $24,000 from a protected minor trust. You will be arrested for felony fraud before the week is over. She reached forward and pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call. The silence returned to the kitchen, but it was no longer heavy or oppressive. It felt clear. It felt like justice. I stared at my grandmother. She did not look triumphant. She looked incredibly sad, mourning the moral collapse of the son she had raised. But her resolve was unbreakable. She slid my phone back across the granite counter. Get some rest, Taylor, she said softly. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. The 24-hour deadline Josephine imposed stretched out like a drawn bowstring, humming with anticipation. We spent that evening systematically converting the formal dining room into a tribunal. Josephine did not require a television, a book, or any form of distraction. She sat at the imported Italian marble table, methodically reviewing the stolen trust fund statements, highlighting every unauthorized withdrawal with a neon yellow marker. I finally managed to take a cold shower after Josephine contacted an emergency utility service and paid the past due water bill in full. The cold water washing over my skin felt like a baptism, stripping away the sweat and the fear of the past 4 days. When I emerged, wearing clean clothes and feeling human again, I took my place at the table right next to my grandmother. I was no longer the forgotten spare child hiding in the margins. I was the plaintiff, and the evidence was stacked neatly in front of me. My imagination filled in the missing pieces of my parents' catastrophic night in Seattle. With Josephine initiating a hard freeze on the corporate account and David's personal cards already maxed out, They were effectively penniless in a city 2,600 miles from home. The luxury hotel they stayed in the night before would have refused to extend their reservation without a valid payment method on file. I pictured David, stripped of his aristocratic arrogance, forced into a humiliating corner. He would have had to swallow his immense pride and call the corporate office of the Waikiki resort he managed. He would have had to grovel to the regional executives, begging for an emergency payroll advance or a desperate wire transfer just to purchase 3 last-minute economy class airline tickets back to Honolulu. The reality of that downgrade would have broken Olivia. She had packed exclusively for a presidential suite experience. Now she would be dragging her heavy designer luggage through a standard security line, sitting in the cramped middle seat of a commercial jet, surrounded by the ordinary people she spent her entire life trying to avoid. They arrived at the Oahu estate 18 hours after the phone call, just as the midday tropical sun reached its peak. I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. It was not a sleek, black luxury SUV this time, but a standard airport taxi. The heavy oak front door flew open, hitting the rubber wall stopper with a violent thud that echoed through the silent house. "Taylor," Olivia shrieked, her voice cracking with a mixture of exhaustion and venom. "Get out here right now!" I did not move. I remained seated beside Josephine at the marble dining table, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Heavy, dragging footsteps filled the grand foyer. Alyssa appeared first, looking absolutely wretched. Her perfect blowout was a tangled mess, and mascara smudged dark circles under her eyes. She dragged a massive suitcase behind her, the plastic wheels squealing in protest against the hardwood floor. Olivia stormed in right behind her. The flawless, tailored ivory blazer she wore during the live stream was now wrinkled and stained with spilled airplane coffee. Her face, usually a mask of serene perfection, was twisted into a snarl of pure rage. "You manipulative little brat!" Olivia screamed, her eyes locking onto me before she fully processed the room. "I do not know what kind of twisted lies you fed your grandmother, but you have ruined everything. You ruined my business connections. You ruined our family trip. Do you have any idea how much money we lost?" She took a menacing step toward the dining room, her hands balled into fists. But then she crossed the threshold, and the momentum died instantly. Josephine sat at the head of the marble table, her posture straight, her navy linen suit immaculate. The neon yellow highlighted bank statements were spread out in a deliberate, inescapable fan across the smooth stone surface. Right in the center of the display rested a thick legal document printed on heavy cardstock. Olivia stopped breathing. The color drained from her flushed face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. David dragged himself into the room a few seconds later. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. His custom charcoal suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. When he saw his mother sitting at the head of his table, surrounded by the physical evidence of his crimes, his jaw dropped slightly. "Sit down," Josephine commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a density that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. David moved like a sleepwalker, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table and collapsing into it. Olivia remained frozen, her eyes darting between me and the bank statements. I said, "Sit down, Olivia." Josephine repeated her tone, hardening into absolute zero. Olivia practically fell into the chair next to David. Alyssa, entirely oblivious to the lethal tension radiating from the adults, decided this was the moment to reclaim the spotlight. She dropped the handle of her suitcase, letting it slam against the floor, and threw her hands up in the air. "This is so incredibly unfair," Alyssa whined, her voice nasal and grating. "I am supposed to be sitting in a private cabana right now. Instead, I spent the last 14 hours sleeping on the floor of the Seattle airport because David could not even afford a decent hotel room. I had to wear the same clothes 2 days in a row. My entire summer is ruined, and it is all your fault, Taylor.
The toxic entitlement hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. She was complaining about a ruined vacation, while her father was staring down the barrel of a felony fraud charge. Alyssa Josephine said, not bothering to look at her, "Go to your room." But Grandma Alyssa protested, stomping her foot.
I deserve an apology.
You deserve a reality check, Josephine snapped, her eyes finally locking onto the golden child, "which you will receive in due time. Right now, the adults are speaking. Leave the room before I decide to include you in the consequences of this disaster." Alyssa opened her mouth to argue, saw the terrifying, icy resolve in her grandmother's eyes, and immediately clamped it shut. She grabbed her suitcase and stomped up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door loudly enough to rattle the crystal chandelier in the dining room. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat beside Josephine, no longer shrinking into the margins, no longer trying to blend into the wallpaper. I looked directly at my parents. They looked small, pathetic, and entirely broken. Let us review the accounting of the past 14 days. Josephine began her manicured finger tapping the center of the bank statement display. You booked a 2-week luxury Alaskan cruise. You purchased thousands of dollars in designer clothing and luggage. You upgraded to the presidential suite tier. And you funded this entire illusion by draining $24,500 from a protected Uniform Transfers to Minors Act trust account. Mother David whispered, his voice hoarse and trembling. I can explain. You cannot explain away a felony, David. Josephine cut him off instantly. You breached your fiduciary duty as the designated custodian. You stole from your own daughter. And then, to compound your staggering arrogance, you attempted to use my commercial credit line to secure your incidentals, completely bypassing your maxed-out personal accounts. Olivia found her voice, though it sounded reedy and desperate. Josephine, you have to understand the pressure we are under. The Hawaiian real estate market is incredibly competitive. My clients expect a certain level of success. If we do not project wealth, we lose contracts. We were just borrowing the money to maintain our position. We fully intended to replenish the account before Taylor even graduated high school. You left her with $50 and no running water, Josephine stated, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. You maintained your position by sacrificing her survival. Olivia flinched as if she had been slapped. David ran a trembling hand through his messy hair. Mother, what do you want from us? We missed the trip. The corporate account is frozen. I am probably going to lose my job at the resort when the executives find out why I needed that emergency wire transfer. Have we not been punished enough? Punished. Josephine repeated, a sharp, humorless laugh escaping her lips. You think missing a vacation is a punishment? You think embarrassment is a consequence. She reached forward and tapped the thick legal document resting in the center of the table. This is the deed to this property, Josephine announced, her eyes drilling into David's soul. David stared at the heavy cardstock, his brow furrowing in confusion. I know. It is my house. No, David, Josephine corrected him smoothly. You are the occupant. But if you recall the financial arrangement we made 5 years ago when you were struggling to secure the down payment, I hold the primary mortgage. And because you are currently in default of your moral and legal obligations, I am calling in the debt. The air in the room shattered. The realization hit David and Olivia simultaneously. The illusion was not just cracked.
The entire foundation was being ripped out from under them. The heavy cardstock deed to the Hawaiian estate lay in the center of the marble table, a tangible symbol of the power dynamic permanently shifting. For years, I had believed my parents owned this sprawling, manicured paradise. They certainly acted like they did, projecting an aura of effortless wealth to the entire island. But the reality was a carefully constructed house of cards, and Josephine held the joker. When David had secured his executive promotion at the Waikiki resort, he convinced Josephine to act as a silent partner on the mortgage. It was the only way he could qualify for a multi-million-dollar property on a hospitality manager's salary. In exchange for the down payment and the primary legal claim, he promised to manage the estate impeccably and build generational equity. Instead, he had leveraged every ounce of credit he could find, drowning the property in hidden debt to fund designer wardrobes and private school tuitions. David stared at the deed, the realization of his vulnerability crashing over him. "Mother," he stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture, "you cannot just call in the debt. We have an agreement. I have been paying the monthly premiums." "You missed the last 2 payments," David Josephine corrected him smoothly, her manicured finger tapping a separate stack of financial documents. "You diverted those funds to cover the deposit on the Alaskan cruise. The agreement clearly stipulated that any delinquency on the primary mortgage or any action that jeopardized the equity of the property would grant me immediate right of foreclosure. And stealing $24,000 from a protected trust fund certainly qualifies as jeopardizing the family stability." Olivia clutched the edge of the marble table, her knuckles white. "Josephine, you cannot do this. If we lose the house, I lose my staging business. My entire brand is built on this property. I use it as a showcase for high net worth clients. If word gets out that we are facing foreclosure, my reputation in Honolulu will be completely destroyed."
Your reputation was built on a lie, Olivia Josephine retorted, her voice devoid of sympathy.
"You spent your life staging empty houses, and you staged your family the exact same way. You prioritized the appearance of wealth over the well-being of your own daughter. You left Taylor to rot in a sweltering house so you could drink champagne on a glacier." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, the perfect victim performance instantly deploying. "You do not understand the pressure, Josephine. Hawaiian high society is vicious. The women I work with, the wives of the resort investors David answers to, they judge everything. If we do not keep up appearances, we get shut out. The business dries up. We were just trying to survive in the environment we built."
You were not surviving, Josephine countered sharply. You were stealing. You committed felony fraud to buy designer luggage and VIP drink packages. Do not attempt to dress up grand larceny as social survival.
David leaned forward, desperation shining in his exhausted eyes. "Mother, please. I was just borrowing the money. I had every intention of replacing the funds before Taylor even applied to college. It was a dynamic financial management strategy. I just needed to bridge a temporary cash flow issue." A dynamic financial management strategy. Josephine repeated the words, dripping with absolute disgust. She picked up one of the neon yellow highlighted bank statements. "Let us examine your dynamic strategy, David. 2 weeks ago, you withdrew $450 for an educational expense." She turned to look directly at me. "Taylor, did you receive $450 worth of educational materials 2 weeks ago?" I kept my gaze fixed on my father. "No," I replied evenly. "I received a $50 bill and a strict order not to touch the thermostat." Josephine nodded, turning her icy stare back to David. "That $450 paid for the silk evening gown Alyssa packed for the captain's dinner. And this," she tapped another highlighted line, $1,200 categorized as school supplies, paid for the new hard-shell luggage. You did not borrow this money, David. You pillaged it. The silence in the dining room was deafening. The sheer, undeniable weight of the evidence had crushed their usual deflections. They could not gaslight a bank ledger. They could not stage their way out of a financial audit. And then, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place. Footsteps sounded on the staircase. Alyssa appeared in the archway of the dining room. She had clearly been listening from the landing, unable to stay away from the drama. She looked at the deed on the table, then at our parents' pale, defeated faces. "This is ridiculous," Alyssa announced, crossing her arms over her chest. She stomped into the room, directing her venom entirely at David and Olivia. "You promised me this trip would be flawless. You promised me the presidential suite, and now we are getting evicted." "Alyssa, go back upstairs," David growled, a last pathetic attempt to assert authority. "No!" Alyssa shouted, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I am not going upstairs! You ruined my summer! You dragged me through that humiliating security terminal in Seattle, and you did not even buy the car you promised me!" The room went completely still. Even Josephine seemed to freeze, her dark eyes narrowing as she processed the statement. "Car?" Josephine asked quietly. "What car?" Olivia squeezed her eyes shut, a soft, defeated moan escaping her lips. Alyssa, too consumed by her own narcissistic rage to realize what she was admitting, forged ahead. "The convertible. They told me if I kept my mouth shut about the stupid college fund, they would use the leftover money to buy me a car for my sophomore year. They promised." The admission hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I sat frozen in my chair, the breath knocked completely out of my lungs. I had spent the last week believing my parents were the sole architects of this betrayal. I thought Alyssa was just a spoiled, ignorant bystander, blindly consuming the stolen wealth without understanding where it came from. But she knew. She knew they were draining my future. She knew the silk dresses and the VIP boarding passes were paid for with my tuition money. She had watched me clean the house, iron her clothes, and accept the $50 bill, knowing the entire time that she was complicit in the theft. She had traded my education for the promise of a convertible. The last remaining shred of sympathy I held for my sister evaporated, instantly replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. My entire family, every single one of them, had participated in my destruction. Josephine stared at Alyssa, her expression shifting from anger to profound, silent horror. She had raised David to value independence, and she was watching the toxic rot of entitlement consume the next generation. So Josephine said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it commanded the absolute attention of everyone in the room. "You all knew. Every single one of you participated in defrauding this 17-year-old girl. You traded her future for a vacation and a vehicle." David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Olivia stared at the marble table, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied makeup. Alyssa looked around, the gravity of her confession finally piercing her self-centered rage, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The audit was complete. The illusion was entirely shattered. There were no more lies left to hide behind. The stage was empty, and the actors were completely exposed. Josephine stood up from the head of the table. She gathered the highlighted bank statements, tapping the edges against the marble to align the pages perfectly. She picked up the heavy cardstock deed and placed it on top of the pile. "The discovery phase of this intervention is over," Josephine announced, her tone shifting into a register of terrifying executive finality. "You have admitted to the theft. You have confessed to the conspiracy. And now we move to the sentencing phase." She looked down at David, who refused to lift his head from his hands. You have exactly 2 options, David, and I suggest you listen very carefully, because the choice you make in the next 5 minutes will determine whether you sleep in a bed tomorrow night or a holding cell.
The air in the dining room grew so dense it felt difficult to pull into my lungs.
Josephine stood at the head of the marble table, her hands resting lightly on the stack of financial documents and the heavy cardstock deed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to shout to command the space. Her authority was a physical presence, pressing down on my parents until they seemed to shrink into their chairs. I watched David closely. The arrogant resort manager who had slid a brass key across this very table 14 days ago was gone. In his place sat a terrified, cornered man, his custom charcoal suit wrinkled, his expensive watch ticking loudly in the stifling silence. Olivia sat frozen beside him, her flawless makeup ruined by tears she could no longer control. Alyssa hovered near the archway, her previous outburst extinguished by the sheer gravity of our grandmother's demeanor. You have 2 choices, Josephine stated, her tone echoing with the precision of a judge delivering a verdict. And because I am a practical woman, I will outline the first option so you understand exactly what is at stake. She picked up the neon yellow highlighted bank statement, detailing the withdrawal of $24,500. Option 1 is the criminal justice system, Josephine explained, her dark eyes locking onto David. Tomorrow morning, I will drive to the Honolulu Police Department headquarters. I will hand this ledger to a financial crimes detective. I will provide them with your recorded admission of utilizing my commercial credit line under false pretenses. The authorities will open an investigation into the Taylor Grant Educational Trust. They will subpoena the cruise line, trace the wire transfers, and pull the security footage from the Seattle terminal. David squeezed his eyes shut, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Fiduciary fraud against a minor is not a simple misunderstanding. Josephine continued, her voice devoid of any warmth. It is a Class B felony in this state. When the police finalize their report, the district attorney will issue a warrant for your arrest. You will be handcuffed, processed, and held until bail is set. The local news networks will inevitably uncover the story, given your high-profile position at the resort. You will lose your job, your industry reputation, and eventually a jury will sentence you to a very real, very unforgiving prison term. Olivia let out a sharp, strangled sob, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. The pristine image she had spent a decade staging was dissolving into a nightmare of mugshots and courtroom sketches. That is option 1, Josephine said, setting the bank statement back down. Now, let us discuss option 2. She picked up the heavy deed to the Oahu estate. Option 2 keeps you out of a jail cell, but it requires your total, unconditional surrender. I have already contacted my estate attorney, Nathaniel Reed. He is currently drafting a voluntary cash for keys surrender agreement. You will sign it tomorrow morning. David opened his eyes, a desperate, confused light flickering in them. Cash for keys. Mother, what does that mean? It means you are forfeiting your right to a lengthy foreclosure process, Josephine clarified smoothly. In exchange for my silence regarding the criminal fraud, you will voluntarily vacate this property. You will waive your right to an eviction hearing. You have exactly 72 hours to pack your personal clothing, your shoes, and whatever fits into the trunk of your car. You will leave the furniture, the art, and everything else purchased with the equity of this house. By Friday at noon, you will hand me the keys and you will walk out that front door. Forever. Olivia gasped, shaking her head frantically. 72 hours. Josephine, that is impossible. We have nowhere to go. We have no savings. Our credit cards are maxed out.
We cannot even afford a security deposit on a rental apartment right now.
That sounds like a logistical challenge you should have considered before you stole your daughter's college tuition, Josephine replied, her expression remaining hard as granite.
David leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table.
And what happens to the house? I am putting it on the market immediately, Josephine stated. The proceeds from the sale will be used to replenish the educational trust you drained with interest. Whatever is left over will be placed into a new, heavily guarded account that neither of you will ever be able to access. She turned her gaze toward me for a brief second, offering a small, reassuring nod before focusing back on my parents. Which brings me to the final stipulation of option 2, Josephine added. Alongside the surrender agreement, you will both sign legal documents relinquishing any and all parental rights to Taylor's finances. You will remove yourselves as custodians from every account bearing her name. Furthermore, I will be assuming full legal guardianship of Taylor for her final year of high school. You will have zero authority over her education, her medical decisions, or her future. The silence that followed was profound. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Homelessness or a prison cell? David broke. The sound he made was not a word, but a guttural, wounded noise that seemed to tear from the deepest part of his chest. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood up, his legs trembling uncontrollably, and then he collapsed. My father, the man who wore linen suits and catered to billionaires, dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor. "Mother, please," David begged, tears streaming down his face, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, do not do this. I am your son. I will work 3 jobs. I will pay back every single cent. I will go to counseling. Just give me a chance to fix it. Do not take my home. Do not take my life away." He crawled forward a few inches, reaching out to grasp the hem of Josephine's navy linen skirt. Olivia turned her head away, unable to watch the humiliating display, though her own shoulders shook with silent, terrified sobs. Alyssa stood, frozen in the archway, her eyes wide with shock, finally comprehending that the bank of Mom and Dad was permanently closed. I sat in my chair and watched my father beg. I waited for a familiar wave of guilt or pity to wash over me. I had been conditioned my entire life to manage their emotions, to make myself smaller so they could feel big. But as I looked down at the man crying on the floor, I felt nothing but a cold, clear detachment. He was not crying because he realized the depth of his betrayal. He was crying because he had finally encountered a boundary he could not manipulate. Josephine did not flinch. She did not reach down to comfort him. She simply took a deliberate step backward, pulling the fabric of her skirt out of his desperate grasp. "You had 17 years to be a father, David," Josephine said, her voice echoing with chilling finality. "You chose to be a fraud instead. Your tears do not impress me. They only prove that you are sorry you were caught." She looked at her wristwatch, a sleek silver timepiece that caught the light of the chandelier. "Nathaniel Reed will be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning with the paperwork," Josephine announced, addressing the top of David's bowed head. "If those documents are not signed by 9:15, my next phone call will be to the police. You have until then to make your choice." She turned away from the table, signaling that the tribunal was adjourned. The room remained trapped in a suffocating paralysis. David stayed on his knees, weeping quietly into his hands. Olivia stared blankly at the marble table, her mind desperately spinning, searching for a loophole that did not exist. I knew my mother better than anyone. She was a woman who made her living controlling the narrative, and right now, The narrative was slipping rapidly out of her perfectly manicured fingers. She would not accept this defeat quietly. She would try to spin it, to change the story before the reality set in. The morning sun crusted over the dormant volcanic craters of Oahu, flooding our grand foyer with brilliant, unforgiving light. It was a beautiful tropical Wednesday, but the interior of the house felt like a morgue. The deadline for the surrender agreement was approaching fast. Attorney Nathaniel Reed was scheduled to arrive in less than 2 hours. I found Olivia sitting at the kitchen island. She was still wearing the stained ivory blazer from the disastrous Seattle flight. A half-empty mug of cold coffee rested near her elbow. Her manicured fingers were flying across the illuminated screen of her smartphone, her thumbs tapping out a frantic, desperate rhythm. She was a woman drowning in a sea of her own consequences, reaching for the only life preserver she knew how to use: public perception. I walked to the refrigerator to grab a bottle of water, keeping my distance. My phone buzzed in the back pocket of my denim shorts. I pulled it out and looked at the lock screen. It was a notification from a social media platform. Olivia Grant has just updated her status. I leaned against the cool stainless steel of the refrigerator door and opened the application. The post was a masterpiece of narcissistic fiction. Olivia had uploaded a black and white photograph of our family, carefully filtered to look somber and artistic. The caption underneath read like a tragic monologue. "My heart is shattered this morning. We had to rush home from a much-needed family vacation because of a devastating medical emergency. It is so incredibly painful to watch the people you love lose their cognitive faculties. Aging parents can become paranoid, confused, and tragically destructive. We are currently dealing with a heartbreaking situation where sudden, severe dementia is tearing our family apart and forcing us out of our beloved home. Please keep us in your prayers as we navigate this dark chapter." I stared at the screen, a cold sickness settling in my stomach. She was laying the groundwork to explain their impending eviction. She was painting Josephine as a senile, abusive elder, suffering from dementia, hoping to weaponize the sympathy of her wealthy peers. She was using a fabricated medical tragedy to shield her own felony fraud. A soft chuckle broke the tense silence in the kitchen. I looked up. Josephine was standing in the archway, holding her leather-encased silver tablet. She had been awake for hours, dressed in a fresh slate gray pantsuit, looking sharper and more lucid than anyone else in the room. She had clearly seen the notification as well. Olivia froze, her thumbs hovering over her phone. She looked up at her mother-in-law, a flash of genuine terror crossing her exhausted features. "Dementia," Olivia Josephine mused, her voice smooth and devoid of any anger. "That is a very creative angle. I suppose it sounds much better than admitting your husband is a thief and you are an accomplice." "I was just asking for support," Olivia stammered, her voice shaking. "My friends are worried about us. They noticed we missed the ship departure. I had to tell them something." Josephine walked slowly toward the kitchen island. During her tenure building a national logistics firm in the 1980s, Josephine had pioneered the transition from paper ledgers to digital tracking systems. She understood technology, networking, and digital footprints far better than my mother, who only used the internet to post staged photographs. "You should never throw stones in a glass house," Olivia Josephine advised, quietly setting her tablet on the granite surface. "Especially when you do not own the house, and I possess the blueprints to shatter it." Josephine opened her email client. The screen was already preloaded with a drafted message. She did not bother replying to the social media post. Engaging in a public comment war was beneath her. Arguing with a narcissist in a public forum only feeds their victim complex. Josephine preferred a much more surgical approach. She targeted the foundation. I watched the screen over my grandmother's shoulder. The recipient line was populated with a meticulous distribution list. It included the president of the Honolulu Luxury Real Estate Board. It included the senior partners at the 3 largest staging agencies in Hawaii. It included a dozen of Olivia's most lucrative current clients. And finally, it included the regional vice president of the hospitality group that owned David's Waikiki Resort. The subject line was simple: notification of fraudulent activity and breach of fiduciary duty regarding David and Olivia Grant. The body of the email contained a factual, emotionless summary of the events. It detailed the unauthorized withdrawal of $24,500 from a protected minor trust. It detailed the attempt to fraudulently utilize a commercial credit line at the Port of Seattle. But the text was not the weapon. The attachments were the weapon. Josephine had attached a high-resolution digital scan of the UTMA bank ledger. She had attached the printed cancellation notice from the cruise line, showing the exact time the boarding passes were flagged for fraud. She had attached a signed affidavit from her own commercial bank, proving David was not authorized to use the black card for personal luxury travel. It was an ironclad, legally binding audit of their destruction. It was undeniable proof. Olivia watched her mother-in-law tap the screen. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "I am correcting the narrative," Josephine replied, and she pressed send. The digital swoosh sound echoed through the kitchen. The emails vanished into the ether, traveling at the speed of light to the inboxes of the most powerful people in my parents' social and professional circles. "You did not," Olivia gasped, her eyes widening in sheer horror. She dropped her phone onto the counter, her hands flying to her hair. "Tell me, you did not just send my financial information to my clients." "I did not send your financial information," Josephine corrected her sharply. "I sent the evidence of your theft. If you are going to publicly claim I am suffering from cognitive decline, I am well within my rights to demonstrate my profound mental clarity to your professional network." The fallout was instantaneous. Less than 2 minutes after the email deployed, Olivia's phone began to vibrate against the granite counter. The caller ID flashed the name of a prominent real estate developer whose multi-million-dollar beachfront property Olivia was scheduled to stage next week. Olivia snatched the phone, her hands shaking violently. "Hello, Marcus," she answered, forcing a bright, cheerful tone that sounded painfully hollow. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a man speaking rapidly and sternly through the receiver. Olivia's face crumbled. "Marcus, please, there is a huge misunderstanding," Olivia begged, pacing back and forth across the kitchen floor. "My mother-in-law is very ill. She is sending out fabricated documents. The staging contract is still secure, I promise you." The voice on the other end cut her off sharp and final. The call ended. Olivia stared at the darkened screen, her mouth hanging open. "He canceled," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He said his legal team advised him to sever all ties pending a formal investigation into our financial practices. He is pulling the Diamond Head property from my portfolio." Before she could even process the loss, a text message chimed, then another, then an email notification. Her device lit up like a slot machine, dispensing nothing but ruin. Her premier staging assistant texted to say she was resigning immediately, refusing to be associated with an agency flagged for felony theft. Another client sent a brief, formal email canceling a consultation. The carefully curated facade was shattering in real time, the fragments raining down on the kitchen floor. At that exact moment, David shuffled down the stairs, wearing sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt. He looked exhausted, defeated, and entirely oblivious to the digital apocalypse occurring in the kitchen. His phone rang. It was a loud, obnoxious corporate ringtone. David pulled the device from his pocket. He stared at the screen, his eyes going wide. It is the regional vice president, David muttered, his voice thick with dread. Why is corporate calling me this early? He answered the call, bringing the phone to his ear. Yes, Mr. Sterling, David said, trying to sound professional. He listened for 30 seconds. He did not say another word. The blood rushed out of his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He slowly lowered the phone, his hand trembling so badly the device almost slipped from his fingers.
They suspended me, David announced to the empty air, his voice hollow.
They received an email from an external source detailing severe financial misconduct and credit fraud. I am placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full corporate background audit. They are demanding I return my resort keys and my access badge by noon. Olivia let out a high-pitched wail of despair. She abandoned her phone on the counter and sprinted toward the home office. I followed her, slowly standing in the doorway, while she threw herself into the heavy leather desk chair. She opened her laptop, her fingers slamming against the keyboard. She logged into her email client, frantically searching for a way to recall the messages, to hack into the server to unsend the truth. She was weeping openly now, hot tears streaming down her face, ruining her complexion. Please, 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 she chanted over and over, clicking the mouse with frantic desperation. I cannot lose the brand. I cannot lose the agency. It is all I have. I leaned against the wooden doorframe, watching the woman who was supposed to protect me unravel over a lost staging contract. This was the pebble that caused the final avalanche in my heart. She was not crying because she had betrayed her youngest child. She was not crying because she had stolen my future or because she had left me to survive in a sweltering house without water. She was crying because strangers would no longer look at her with envy. She cared infinitely more about her reputation in Hawaiian high society than she cared about my existence. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. Any lingering hope I harbored, any tiny fragment of childhood longing that wished she would turn around and apologize to me, died in that doorway. I felt a profound sense of freedom. The emotional tether connecting me to this toxic illusion snapped. I turned away from the office, leaving her weeping over her keyboard. The facade was dead. The truth was out. And it was time to sign the surrender. 7 days had passed since Josephine laid the heavy cardstock deed on the marble dining table. We were now sitting in the sterile, climate-controlled environment of Nathaniel Reed's downtown Honolulu law office. The sprawling mahogany conference table was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the exhausted, defeated faces of the people who used to dictate my existence. The panoramic windows offered a sweeping view of Waikiki Beach, but nobody was looking at the sparkling turquoise water. All eyes were fixed on the towering stack of legal documents resting between us. The 72-hour eviction window had been a masterclass in swift clinical dismantling. David and Olivia were forced to pack their lives into cardboard boxes, leaving behind the custom furniture, the imported art, and the sprawling square footage that defined their false reality. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment located in an industrial zone near the airport, a neighborhood Olivia would have previously refused to drive through. Watching them carry garbage bags full of designer clothes out the front door felt surreal. There were no cameras, there were no social media updates, just the quiet, agonizing labor of consequence. The fallout extended far beyond the loss of the estate. The corporate background audit at the resort concluded faster than anyone anticipated. David was formally terminated 48 hours after Josephine's email deployed. He was escorted off the property by security, stripped of his access badge, and barred from ever returning to the premises. The hospitality network in Hawaii is insular. Word of his fiduciary fraud spread like wildfire, ensuring he would never manage another luxury property on the island again. Alyssa faced a similarly brutal awakening. Without the stolen trust funds or David's executive salary to prop up her lifestyle, her out-of-state college tuition vanished overnight. She was forced to unenroll from her prestigious mainland university and return to Oahu permanently. But Josephine refused to let her sit idle in the airport apartment. Utilizing her formidable network, my grandmother secured Alyssa a job. It was not a marketing internship or a junior executive networking role. Alyssa was hired as an entry-level housekeeping attendant at the exact same Waikiki resort David used to manage. The golden child, who had demanded silk evening gowns and complained about ironing, was now required to scrub toilets and make beds for the wealthy tourists her father used to entertain. It was a flawless execution of poetic justice, rendering her toxic entitlement entirely obsolete. Nathaniel Reed, a man with sharp features and a demeanor devoid of emotion, cleared his throat. He tacked a gold fountain pen against the pristine legal pad in front of him. "We are here to execute the voluntary surrender agreement and the transfer of guardianship," he stated, his voice flat and authoritative. "By signing these documents, David and Olivia Grant are officially relinquishing all claims to the Oahu estate. The property will be listed for sale immediately." He slid the first thick packet across the polished mahogany surface. David picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely grip the metal barrel. He signed his name on the dotted line, his signature nothing more than a jagged, erratic scribble. Olivia followed suit, keeping her eyes cast downward, unable to look at me, unable to look at Josephine, unable to face the reality she could no longer stage. Nathaniel retrieved the packet and slid a second set of papers forward. Furthermore, he continued pacing the room with methodical precision. "This establishes the new financial parameters. The proceeds from the impending real estate sale will first replenish the initial $24,500 stolen from the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account, plus accrued interest and punitive damages. The remaining equity will be directed into a newly formed, irrevocable trust solely for the benefit of Taylor Grant." He paused, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. "This new trust is ironclad. It is heavily guarded by an independent financial board. Neither David nor Olivia will have any legal access, signatory rights, or custodial privileges regarding these funds. Your financial oversight is permanently revoked." My parents signed the second packet in deafening silence. They were signing away their access to my future. They were signing away their leverage. And finally, Nathaniel said, sliding the third and final document onto the table, "The transfer of guardianship. Josephine Grant will assume full legal and physical custody of Taylor Grant for the remainder of her minority. You are forfeiting all parental rights, responsibilities, and decision-making authority." I watched my mother pick up the gold pen one last time. For 17 years, she had dictated my wardrobe, my chores, and my presence. She had kept me hidden in the shadows so her fabricated life could shine brighter. She had deemed me unworthy of a luxury vacation, unworthy of a college education, and unworthy of basic truth. Now, with a few strokes of ink, she was legally erasing herself from my life. It was a severing so profound it felt physical, like a heavy chain snapping and falling away from my chest. I felt a strange, quiet serenity wash over me. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the need to demand an apology they were incapable of giving. The empty space they occupied in my heart was finally being cleaned out, making room for a future I would build on my own terms. Josephine signed the final line of the guardianship transfer, her signature bold and unwavering. She set the pen down and folded her hands on the table. "The transaction is complete," she announced softly. Nathaniel gathered the documents, placing them into a thick leather folio. "The legal proceedings are concluded," he stated, signaling the end of the meeting. He nodded respectfully to Josephine and stepped out of the conference room to file the paperwork, leaving the four of us alone in the tense, echoing space. David stood up slowly, his shoulders hunched forward, his posture radiating defeat. He looked like a hollow shell of the man who used to check his Rolex every 5 minutes. He patted the pockets of his rumpled trousers, his face paling as he realized he had nothing. His corporate cards were canceled, his personal accounts were frozen pending the fraud investigation. His car had been repossessed the day prior due to missed payments. He was quite literally destitute. Olivia stood beside him, clutching a cheap canvas tote bag instead of her usual designer purse. She stared blankly at the floor, refusing to acknowledge my existence. David cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously around the room before finally landing on his mother. "Josephine," he mumbled, his voice thick with humiliation. "We need to get back to the apartment. The bus route does not run this far downtown, and we have no transportation. Can you lend us $20 for a taxi fare, just to get us out of here?" He was begging his mother for cab fare in the same room where he had just signed away a multi-million-dollar estate. The irony hung thick and suffocating in the air. Josephine looked at him, her expression a mask of impenetrable ice. "I am not a charity, David. I am the consequence of your actions. You will have to find your own way home." David lowered his head, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. He turned toward the heavy glass door, preparing to walk out into the sweltering Honolulu heat with nothing but the clothes on his back. "Wait," I said. My voice rang out clear and steady, halting him in his tracks. David turned around, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his exhausted eyes. Olivia finally looked up, her gaze darting toward me, expecting a moment of weakness, a sudden display of daughterly forgiveness. They thought the quiet, compliant, spare child was going to save them one last time. I stood up from the mahogany table. I reached into the front pocket of my denim jeans. My fingers brushed against a small, tightly folded square of paper. I had carried it with me every single day since they left for Seattle. I pulled it out and walked slowly toward the end of the table. I did not offer a speech. I did not raise my voice or hurl an insult. I simply unfolded the crisp $50 bill David had left on the kitchen console table 2 weeks ago. The emergency money he deemed sufficient to sustain my survival while he sailed toward glaciers on my stolen tuition. I placed the $50 bill flat on the polished mahogany surface. I slid it across the table with my index finger. It glided smoothly, coming to a halt just inches from David's trembling hands. "For emergencies," I said, my tone echoing the exact patronizing instruction he had given me. David stared at the green paper, the hope in his eyes shattered, replaced by a profound, agonizing realization. He recognized the bill. He recognized the exact fold lines. It was the physical manifestation of his neglect returned to him in his darkest moment of need. His hand hovered over the table, shaking violently. He had to make a choice. He could preserve his remaining shred of pride and walk away, or he could accept the humiliation and take the charity of the daughter he abandoned. His fingers closed around the $50 bill. He snatched it off the table, unable to meet my gaze, unable to look at Josephine. He turned and practically ran out of the conference room, dragging his wife behind him. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing them out of my life forever. The power transfer was complete. I stood in the quiet law office looking out at the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, knowing I would never have to shrink myself for them again. The humid, diesel-tinged air of the Honolulu airport felt radically different today. For 17 years, airports had been stages where my mother directed our movements, ensuring our luggage tags faced outward and our smiles matched her social media aesthetic. But today, the terminal was just a building, and I was just a traveler.
3 months had passed since the surrender agreement was signed in Nathaniel Reed's office.
The rapid deconstruction of my parents' false reality had been absolute. The sprawling Oahu estate sold quickly in the aggressive Hawaiian market. True to her word, Josephine ensured the primary mortgage was satisfied, the stolen trust funds were replenished with interest, and the remaining equity was locked away in an impenetrable financial fortress bearing my name.
David, Olivia, and Alyssa were now residing in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment located directly under the flight path of this very airport. The constant roar of commercial jets served as a perpetual, deafening reminder of the heights they had fallen from. Olivia had attempted to launch a boutique staging consultancy, but her name was toxic in the industry. She spent her days aggressively networking on LinkedIn, sending desperate connection requests to people who had long ago blocked her number. David remained unemployed, his resume stained by the unceremonious termination from the resort. Alyssa's reality check had been the most severe. Stripped of the stolen tuition money and the promise of a convertible, she was forced to confront the actual cost of living. She clocked in every morning at the Waikiki resort, wearing a polyester uniform, pushing a heavy housekeeping cart down the same hallways where she used to demand VIP service. She had quickly learned that the hospitality industry does not care about your designer shoes when you are the one required to clean the toilets. I stood near the departure gate with Josephine. We were not traveling light, but we were traveling legitimately. We were surrounded by durable, practical luggage, free from the heavy burden of pretense. "Are you ready for this?" Josephine asked, handing me my passport. She wore a comfortable, beige linen travel suit, looking every bit the formidable matriarch who had orchestrated my liberation. I looked down at the dark blue booklet in my hand. Inside was a visa stamp and a boarding pass for a direct flight to Tokyo, Japan. It was not a spontaneous luxury vacation designed for Instagram likes. It was a month-long, culturally immersive trip, carefully planned by Josephine. We were scheduled to visit historical sites, explore rural logistics hubs, and immerse ourselves in a culture that valued discipline and deep-rooted respect. It was an educational journey, fully funded by the legitimate interest generated from my newly protected trust account. "I am ready," I replied, a genuine smile breaking across my face. I have never been more ready for anything. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message notification from a number I had not saved in my contacts, but I recognized the digits immediately. It was Olivia. "Taylor, I know you are leaving today," the message read. "Please, we are struggling so much right now. David cannot find work, and the rent on this apartment is due next week. We are drowning. You have that trust fund now. You have so much equity from the house. Please, can you just transfer a few $1,000s just to help us get back on our feet? We are your family. I am your mother. Please do not leave us like this." I stared at the glowing text. I read the words, searching for the familiar spike of guilt, the conditioned panic that used to force me into compliance. I searched for the 17-year-old girl who would have ironed silk dresses and hidden in the margins just to avoid conflict. She was gone. Olivia was not apologizing for stealing my future. She was not apologizing for abandoning me in a sweltering house without water. She was apologizing because she was out of money, and she saw me as the nearest available ATM. She was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to leverage the biological definition of family to fund her survival. But Josephine had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Family is not determined by blood. It is determined by behavior.
The people who love you will never ask you to starve so they can feast. The people who protect you will never drain your future to fund their illusions. I did not reply to the message. I did not type out a long, angry paragraph detailing all the reasons she deserved to struggle. I did not need to justify my boundaries to a woman who had never respected them. I simply tapped the small information icon in the top right corner of the screen. I scrolled down past the location settings and the notification preferences. I found the option I was looking for highlighted in stark, undeniable red text. Block this caller. I pressed it. A small confirmation prompt appeared warning me that I would not receive any further phone calls, messages, or FaceTime requests from people on my block list. I confirmed the action. The screen blinked and the message thread vanished, completely erased from my digital reality. The severing was absolute. I slid the phone back into my pocket, feeling lighter than I had in 17 years. "Everything okay?" Josephine asked, noticing the small, definitive movement. I looked at my grandmother, the woman who had arrived unannounced and dismantled a toxic empire just to save the spare child. I looked at the departure gate, where passengers were beginning to line up for the long flight across the Pacific. "Everything is perfect," I answered, my voice steady and clear. We joined the line, handing our boarding passes to the agent. The scanner beeped a cheerful, welcoming green light. There were no flashing red errors. There were no security officers waiting to escort us away in disgrace. There was only the open jet bridge leading to an airplane that was going to carry me thousands of miles away from the margins I had been forced to inhabit. I walked down the ramp, the low hum of the massive jet engines vibrating beneath my feet. I did not look back. I did not need to. The people who tried to leave me behind were permanently trapped in my wake, and I was finally moving forward, stepping into a life that belonged entirely to me. There is a very specific, deeply ingrained myth in American culture that equates a pristine front lawn with a healthy home. We are conditioned from a young age to believe in the sanctity of the traditional family structure, taught that a roof over our heads, a hot meal on the table, and a smiling holiday portrait are the ultimate metrics of successful parenting. But what happens when the portrait is a lie? What happens when the roof covers a chilling emotional vacuum and the hot meal is served with a side of conditionality? Through the stories of survival, betrayal, and ultimate liberation that we have explored, a profound and often uncomfortable truth emerges. The most dangerous homes are rarely the ones with shattered windows. They are the perfectly staged ones, the ones bathed in the glow of social media validation, where children are treated not as human beings to be nurtured, but as props to be managed. Parenting in the modern era has increasingly fallen prey to the seduction of optics. In a society that worships success, wealth, and the appearance of having it all together, family responsibility is frequently outsourced to the currency of luxury. We see parents draining trust funds to secure VIP cruise tickets, mothers agonizing over their online engagement while their children starve, and fathers prioritizing their country club reputations over the emotional safety of their offspring. This is the tragic consequence of confusing provision with presence. True parenting requires a level of emotional awareness that cannot be purchased. It demands the grueling, unglamorous work of actually seeing your child, not for what they can do for your image, but for who they are in the quiet, unlit moments of their lives. When honesty is abandoned in favor of maintaining a lucrative facade, the family structure rots from the inside out. The children trapped in these environments learn very quickly that their worth is entirely dependent on their compliance. They become fluent in the language of silence, absorbing the toxic lesson that to be loved is to be convenient. The concept of fairness in raising children is often misunderstood as simply giving everyone an equal slice of cake. But emotional fairness is infinitely more complex. It is the active, continuous dismantling of the golden child and scapegoat dynamic. In homes where emotional awareness is bankrupt, parents naturally gravitate toward the child who reflects their own vanity, casting the other into the cold margins of the family dynamic. The spare child is left to iron the silk dresses of their siblings to survive on $50, while the rest of the bloodline sails toward glaciers, or to sit on a darkened porch with their belongings in garbage bags. This blatant favoritism does not just breed resentment. It fundamentally rewires a child's psychological framework. It teaches them that love is a scarce resource, a prize to be won through self-erasure. Yet it is precisely in this crucible of unfairness that a profound resilience is forged. The children who are denied the warmth of the hearth are the ones who learn to build their own fires. We are constantly told that blood is thicker than water, a proverb that is frequently weaponized to demand endless forgiveness and unconditional loyalty from the abused to their abusers. Society expects the abandoned child to eventually reconcile with the narcissistic mother or the financially ruinous father, simply because family is family. But examining these narratives forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality. Biology is nothing more than a genetic coincidence. It is not a contract of love, and it is certainly not a free pass for lifelong emotional extortion. True family responsibility is an active verb. It is the grandmother who flies across the Pacific to audit a stolen trust fund. It is the uncle who drives 3 hours in the dead of night to rescue a discarded teenager and spends the next decade building her self-worth. These figures represent the true essence of traditional family values, which are protection, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to a child's future. They remind us that when the biological architects of a family fail, the structure does not have to collapse. It can be rebuilt by those who choose to show up. The most crucial lesson for any child navigating the wreckage of conditional parenting is the realization of their own autonomy. For years, the child waits for the apology that will never come, for the mother to finally look up from her smartphone, for the father to prioritize his daughter over his resort executives. The turning point arrives not when the parents finally change, but when the child realizes they no longer need them to change. This is the moment the heavy, suffocating chain of conditional self-worth snaps. It is a quiet, monumental shift where the child recognizes that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but the purest form of self-preservation. Holding parents accountable, whether through legal audits, formal evictions, or simply blocking a phone number, is a necessary disruption of generational trauma. It is the ultimate expression of emotional awareness and long-term self-guidance. As we navigate the complexities of our own relationships, these stories serve as both a mirror and a map. They challenge us to look closely at the foundations of our own homes. Are we building fortresses of genuine love? Or are we staging elaborate showrooms for the applause of strangers? If you have ever felt like an extra in the movie of your own family, if you have ever had to scavenge for your own self-worth in the shadow of someone else's ego, know that your silence was not weakness. It was your survival strategy. And survival is just the first step toward liberation. I invite you to continue this journey of exploration and empowerment with us. Please take a moment to subscribe to Zara Told Stories like this video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a narrative that speaks to the hidden, resilient corners of the human heart. Share your own experiences in the comments below, because your voice might be the exact beacon someone else needs to find their way out of the dark. I leave you with this final, perhaps unsettling, thought to carry with you. Society insists that the ultimate goal of healing is to forgive your parents and welcome them back to the table. But the most profound truth of human growth runs directly counter to this comforting myth. Sometimes, the highest form of healing is not reconciliation. It is the absolute, peaceful acceptance of estrangement. It is the realization that the greatest gift your parents ever gave you was their absence, because it forced you to become the architect of your own salvation. When you look in the mirror tonight, ask yourself this one question. Who would you be if you finally stopped waiting for the people who hurt you to heal you? The answer might just change the entire trajectory of your life.